Hello and welcome to my channel, Vice Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video from David Reeves Ministries that claims to explain the origin of languages. And since it's a Young Earth Creationist ministry, you know that the origin of languages is going to be something silly like the Tower of Babel. So let's go! Hey, that music sounds familiar. Where have I heard that before?
Moving to the country, gonna eat a lot of peaches. Moving to the country, gonna eat a lot of peaches.
Oh, there it is. Ripping off the presidents of the United States of America? How unpatriotic.
After Noah and his family got off the ark, God gave them a simple command: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But just 2 chapters later, we read the response of Noah's descendants. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.
Why are you reading a different version than the one you have on the screen? I would say it's because whatever version you're reading says the top is in the heavens rather than in heaven, because the heavens can be understood to mean the sky, while in heaven is usually understood to mean the magical place that God lives and that Christians go to when they die. But then you could have just used that version on the screen too. It's a minor mystery, I will admit, but suffice it to say that this is one of those stories that is obviously demonstrating ancient Hebrew cosmology, but it had to be reinterpreted when we came to understand just how wrong Hebrew cosmology is.
You see, God had commanded Noah and his descendants to fill the earth, but they decided they had a better plan. Instead, they wanted to do something people would remember, so they built a city and a tower to make their own name great instead of God's.
That's not the way it reads at all. Chapter 10 is all about which nations came from which of Noah's sons, and ends with the verse, "These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies and their nations, and from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood." The first verse of chapter 11 says, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words." So a straightforward reading of these 2 chapters suggests that mankind had spread over the whole earth, but they all spoke the same language. The story then continues on with verse 2, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So this story does not appear to be talking about everyone on the earth gathering in this one plain, but just a group of people gathering there. I will admit that this doesn't fit terribly well with the end of the story, where these people's language is confused and they are then scattered all over the earth, but even if I grant you that this city was supposed to be all the people on the earth in one place, it still doesn't jive well with what you say next, so let's look at that before I continue.
God judged their rebellion in an interesting way. He confused their language, turning the universal language into a variety of language families. Basically, this forced the people to spread out over the earth like He had commanded in the first place.
So what you seem to be saying here is that the punishment God doled out, the confusing of the languages, was a result of the people not following God's instructions to spread out over the whole earth. If that's the case, then why does the story say, "And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." This makes it quite clear that God, for whatever reason, is scared that humans may become too powerful. His reason for confusing human language was his fear of humanity having power. Let that sink in for a minute. And then remember that what sparked this fear in God was the fact that people were building a moderately tall tower. Today we build skyscrapers that are much taller than anything these ancient people would have ever been able to even dream of, and we have people living full-time in low Earth orbit. We have sent people to the moon. We've sent probes to all the planets in the solar system. This story was written when it was believed that heaven was a physical place up in the sky, so building a tall enough tower would allow you to enter God's domain without God's permission. God didn't like that idea. But now we know that there isn't a magical kingdom in the sky, and it's clear that if God exists, He doesn't care how high up we go, because anyone flying in an airplane is going up higher than the Tower of Babel, and God allows that to happen all the time. This story is clearly nothing more than an ideological myth meant to explain the origin of different languages.
The account of the Tower of Babel only takes up about 9 verses, but it has a profound significance for us even today. The division of the languages broke the human gene pool into groups. These groups spread out and tended to stick to themselves. In other words, most people wanted to marry someone who could understand their language. So certain genetic characteristics, such as eye shape or skin shade, became dominant in certain groups.
Okay, so your assertion is that racial differences are because the language changed first, and then the people who spoke certain languages only bred with other people who spoke the same language, and so certain physical features became dominant in these linguistically isolated people. I can kind of follow the logic, but in reality, humanity's racial differences probably evolved at the same time as language. As people spread out across the globe, their physical characteristics adapted to new environments, and because they were genetically isolated from the people who lived where humanity started, these differences gradually increased. Language evolution works in much the same way. As people become physically separated from populations that live in their ancestors' location, their language changes slightly from generation to generation, eventually leading to the development of whole new languages. We can see this happening with dialects changing based on regions. My wife grew up in France. She speaks a version of French so different from Canadian French that depending on the region in Quebec that we go to, they can't understand her at all. And language evolution happens so quickly that we can observe it today and see that the geographical separation comes first, with linguistic differences happening after the separation, not before. Same with the evolution of different racial characteristics. Humanity was probably very dark skinned in its beginning, as that is a trait that helps protect our skin from the sun. However, there is an approximately inverse relationship between how dark your skin is and how well your skin produces vitamin D, thanks to two different kinds of melanin. Darker skinned people have higher levels of eumelanin, which doesn't produce vitamin D very well, but does act as a bit of a natural sunscreen. Lighter skinned people have higher levels of pheomelanin, which is great at producing vitamin D, but basically ensures that if you get too much sun in your lifetime, you will develop melanoma. But the selection pressure is there. Vitamin D deficiencies can have extremely detrimental effects on children, while melanoma doesn't usually set in until late adulthood, so melanoma is not selected against, while vitamin D production is selected for. Essentially, the way it works out is that the further away you get from the equator, the more important vitamin D production becomes, and the less important protection from the sun becomes as you get less sunlight per year than at the equator. So populations that migrated farther away from the equator ended up with lighter skin tones, while those who remained close to the equator kept their dark skin tones. And as they moved, their languages also changed. So please tell me how speaking the same language as someone resulted in character traits that also just happened to help with survival in the environments they found themselves in after God confused their language. I think in this case, the naturalistic explanation is by far the more parsimonious of the two.
We all look a little bit different because of the event of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel also explains why we find the remains of people and their tools in caves. Around the same time as the dispersion of the peoples, there was an ice age.
The last glacial maximum, what is colloquially called an ice age, hit its peak about 22,000 years ago and ended 11,000 years ago. According to Answers in Genesis, who you're obviously lifting your material from since your last point was an almost word-for-word plagiarism from Bodhi Hodge's article on the AIG website, the Tower of Babel was built in 2242 BCE, or 4,260 years ago, or just under 7,000 years after the last ice age ended. And we have dendrochronological records going back about 12,000 years. There was no ice age 4,200 years ago. I'm not sure where you're getting this information from. Oh wait, I know exactly where you're getting it from. AIG. Wherever creationist claims can be found nowadays, they almost inevitably can be traced back to either AIG or Kent Hovind.
Now, this ice age was a direct result of the post-flood climate change. As people split up and began spreading out over the earth, some areas were much cooler than others, and people naturally took shelter wherever they could. Caves made great temporary homes. It would take a while before any single language group could acquire the tools, skills, and manpower to start building cities and permanent settlements again.
I doubt it. If God were to do this again and suddenly further divide up languages so that most of the people I know now wouldn't speak the same language as me, and same for all of them, then sure, society would probably backslide for a bit, assuming of course that he made all the languages completely new so that we couldn't just plug everything into a translating app. But most people have enough knowledge of how certain things work that we would be able to fairly quickly rebuild society to almost the same point we're at now. Are you telling me that everyone in their society just forgot how to do everything just because their language got messed up? Nobody thought to bring any of the tools with them that they used for the tower when they left for their great diaspora? Or did God magically whisk them away without their tools? But a magical whisking away of people doesn't really fit the data either, as we can track human migration out of Africa with several different means, including language evolution, by the way, and it doesn't show a magical apparition of people all over the place at the same time. It shows a gradual migration away from Africa.
But that's why certain groups made homes in caves and used stone tools. They were working with what they had.
Yeah, for this time period, we definitely have no archaeological records whatsoever of people using anything but stone tools and living in caves. Sargon of Akkad, the real one, not the YouTuber, conquered Mesopotamia and built his cities with nothing but stone tools, and of course the cities were all in caves, obviously. But then that's close to the Babel area, so obviously Sargon remembered to bring his bronze tools with him, so let's go to Scotland. Would have taken a while to get there, get settled and redevelop tool use, right? So they would all be living in caves in that area at that time period, right? Except that's when the first farmhouses of the Scord of Brewster were built. And let's not forget the Mayans, who were farming in Mesoamerica as early as 2600 BCE. But maybe some people remembered their tools while others forgot, so some lived in caves while others formed empires. This still makes absolutely no sense, and not the least reason of which is that many of these cultures seem to have survived the global flood that should have wiped them all out in 2348 BCE, which happens to be 250 years after the Mayan civilization got started.
Not only that, but God had allowed the Ice Age to lower the ocean levels and create natural land bridges to most of the continents.
That's a funny way to word it. It's as if the Ice Ages are powerless to lower sea levels unless they had God's permission. The Ice Age really, really wanted to, so it promised to behave itself, so God said, okay, you can lower the sea levels. Goofiness aside, you're at least a little bit accurate here. Ice ages do indeed lower sea levels, but as I pointed out earlier, all the evidence points to the last ice age ending 11,000 years ago, and there is no evidence to support an ice age 4,000 years ago. Provide some evidence for this ice age, then we can talk land bridges, the most recent of which was flooded 6,000 years ago. That is, of course, not including the land bridges that are still around today, for instance the Sinai Peninsula connecting Asia and Africa.
This meant that animals coming off of Noah's Ark had a limited time to go fill certain ecological niches. People had the same limited time, but they weren't spreading out.
So what I'm getting from this is that God caused an ice age in order to create land bridges, or rather gave permission to the ice age to cause land bridges, in order to allow creatures to get back to their habitats. And this took at least a century to accomplish. So while I can't absolutely prove that there were no kangaroos in the Middle East, I can tell you that your flood model predicts that the remains of animals that are indigenous to specific areas that are not the Middle East, like kangaroos, penguins, raccoons, etc., should be found in a pattern diverging from the Middle East, with coons headed in the direction of North America, penguins headed towards the Antarctic, kangaroos headed towards Australia, and so on. The fact that we have never found one single out-of-place bone in the Middle East is rather telling. Admittedly, the absence of evidence is not evidence for the absence of a flood or the Tower of Babel in this very specific case, but you would think that by now we would have found at least one example of animal remains that don't belong in the Middle East. And here let me point out that I am well aware that there are many cases where there is not only an absence of evidence for the flood, but also very strong evidence of absence. See Aaron Ra's series on how various scientific fields disprove the flood for further details. The rest of his video is a recap, so I'll end it here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Facebook and support me on Patreon. See you next time.